It was a chilly afternoon in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of day where the sun played hide-and-seek behind thick gray clouds. The streets bustled with life, businessmen rushing to their next meeting, shoppers carrying glossy bags, and tourists snapping pictures of towering skyscrapers. Amidst the chaos, a frail figure sat hunched over on the edge of a worn-out bench, a cardboard sign propped against his knees. The sign read, "Hungry and homeless. Anything helps." His name was Marcus, a man in his late 50s with weathered skin that told a story of years spent battling the elements. His once vibrant green eyes had dulled, clouded with exhaustion and an ache that ran deeper than hunger. Wearing a tattered jacket far too thin for the weather and shoes held together by duct tape, he clutched a paper cup, hoping for the faint jingle of coins. As the hours dragged on, Marcus's hope waned. People passed by without a glance, their hurried steps a reminder of how invisible he had become. He shifted uncomfortably, his stomach growling, a sharp reminder that he hadn't eaten in over a day. Then a black SUV pulled up to the curb nearby, the kind with tinted windows that hinted at someone important inside. The door opened, and out stepped a tall, silver-haired man with an unmistakable air of confidence. It was Clint Eastwood. Yes, the Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend, known for his steely gaze and larger-than-life presence on screen. Marcus's heart raced. He couldn't believe his eyes. The man he'd only ever seen in movies stood just feet away, casually strolling toward a nearby cafe. Desperation and courage clashed within him. What did he have to lose? Tightening his grip on the paper cup, Marcus cleared his throat and called out, his voice cracking, "Excuse me, sir, can you spare $1?" Clint paused mid-step, slowly turning to face Marcus. His piercing blue eyes locked onto the homeless man, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. What Clint Eastwood did next left everyone watching completely stunned. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. If you love stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Now, let's get started. The tension in the air was palpable. Marcus sat frozen, his outstretched hand trembling slightly as Clint Eastwood's eyes lingered on him. A million thoughts raced through Marcus's mind, each one louder than the last. Did I offend him? Did I make a mistake by asking? Why would someone like him even care about someone like me? The city around them didn't pause for the moment. Cars honked, pedestrians hurried by, and the distant hum of street musicians echoed faintly. Yet for Marcus, the world had shrunk to just this exchange. The weight of his circumstances pressed down on him, and he found himself questioning how he had ended up here, begging strangers for $1. His life hadn't always been this way. There was a time when Marcus had a home, a family, a steady job, but life, as unpredictable as it is cruel, had stripped it all away piece by piece, a layoff, mounting debts, a broken marriage, and then the streets. Now, every day felt like a battle against despair, a fight to keep believing that tomorrow might hold something better. Marcus's throat felt dry as he waited for Clint to speak. He clutched his paper cup tighter, the cold biting at his fingertips. He told himself not to hope. Hope, after all, was dangerous. It had disappointed him too many times. But as Clint stepped closer, his rugged face unreadable, a flicker of something unfamiliar stirred in Marcus's chest. Clint's voice finally broke the silence. It was calm but firm, carrying the weight of someone who had seen the world in all its forms. "Why just $1?" he asked, his tone holding a curious edge. Marcus blinked, startled by the unexpected question. His response caught in his throat, but before he could gather the words, Clint's next move shattered every assumption Marcus had made. "Why just $1?" Clint repeated, his gaze sharp but not unkind, as if he were genuinely curious. Marcus hesitated, his mind scrambling for an answer. He felt exposed under the weight of the question, like Clint wasn't just asking about the money, but about his entire existence. I don't know, Marcus stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I guess it's easier to ask for something small. People don't notice $1 missing. His eyes flicked downward, ashamed of his own answer. The words tasted bitter, a reflection of the survival tactics he had adopted just to make it through another day. Clint tilted his head slightly as though weighing Marcus's words. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. Without a word, he held it out to Marcus. For a second, Marcus could only stare, his breath caught in his chest. But instead of taking the money, Marcus found himself asking a question that surprised even him. Why would you give this to me? The words escaped his lips before he could stop them, laced with equal parts disbelief and suspicion. Clint's lips twitched into a faint smile, though his eyes remained serious. Because it's not about the money, he said simply. It's about what you'll do with it. Marcus felt his chest tighten. That single sentence was a challenge, a weight far heavier than the $1 he'd originally asked for. It wasn't just a handout, it was a test, one he wasn't sure he could pass. Do you believe in second chances? Clint asked, his voice calm but piercing, as if he were reaching into the deepest corners of Marcus's soul. And as Marcus sat there, clutching the $100 bill in trembling hands, he realized this moment could change everything, if he had the courage to let it. Marcus's heart pounded as he stared at the $100 bill in his hand, its crisp edges feeling unreal against his rough, calloused fingers. He hadn't held this much money in years, not all at once. His first instinct was to pocket it, but Clint's words echoed in his mind. It's about what you'll do with it. For a moment, he was back in his darkest nights, digging through dumpsters for scraps, sleeping under the rumble of freeway bridges, and watching as people passed him like he was part of the scenery. That $100 felt like salvation, but it also felt like a burden. What will I do with it? The question gnawed at him. Clint, still standing there, seemed to sense the conflict brewing inside Marcus. You've got a choice, he said, his voice steady. You can take this money and make it count, or you can let it slip through your fingers. It's not the bill that matters, it's what it becomes. Marcus swallowed hard. His mind spiraled into doubt. What does he mean by that? Why does this feel so much heavier than just money? He thought about buying a hot meal, something warm for once instead of cold leftovers from a trash bin. But he also thought about the countless times he'd seen people take pity on him, hand him money, and walk away without a second thought. This wasn't like those moments. Clint wasn't walking away. He was waiting, watching. The weight of the moment grew unbearable. Why do you care? Marcus blurted out, his voice laced with frustration. I'm just a nobody, a stranger. You could have just walked past like everyone else. Clint's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something, understanding, maybe, behind his sharp eyes. You think I've never been down before? Clint asked, his tone calm but laced with a surprising intensity. You think you're the only one who's ever lost something? Marcus froze, stunned by the revelation. The Clint Eastwood, the man who seemed larger than life, invincible on the big screen, was standing here, telling him that he, too, knew what it felt like to fall. You don't have to stay down, Clint continued, but the climb back up, it starts with a decision. So, what's it going to be? The words hit Marcus like a freight train. He felt an ache in his chest, a mixture of anger, shame, and a faint, flickering spark of hope. But before he could answer, Clint did something even more unexpected. He reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a small, leather-bound notebook. Write down what you want, Clint said, holding it out. Not what you need today, what you really want. Then figure out how you're going to get there. Marcus stared at the notebook, his hands trembling as he took it. A lump formed in his throat as he realized Clint wasn't just handing him money. He was handing him responsibility, a chance to dream again. And as the reality of the moment began to sink in, Marcus realized he wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. He was being asked to believe in himself, something he hadn't done in years. But could he rise to the challenge? Could he prove to Clint and to himself that he was still worth saving? Marcus sat on the edge of the bench, clutching the notebook as if it were a lifeline. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, doubt, and a flicker of determination he hadn't felt in years. Clint Eastwood, the man who could have walked away without a second thought, stood there waiting, his unwavering gaze urging Marcus to make a move. With a deep, shaky breath, Marcus flipped open the notebook. The blank page stared back at him, mocking him with its emptiness. His hands trembled as he held the pen Clint had handed him. What could he possibly write? What did a man who had nothing dare to want? The first words came hesitantly, the pen scratching faintly against the paper. I want to work again. The simplicity of the statement hit him like a punch to the gut. Marcus could almost hear his younger self laughing at him, the man he used to be, full of pride, ambition, and dreams. He swallowed hard and wrote more. I want to feel human again. I want to be seen. As he scribbled, the words spilled out faster, emotions pouring onto the page like a dam breaking. I want to stop being afraid. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. I want a second chance at life. When he finally looked up, his eyes met Clint's, and for the first time, Marcus saw something in himself reflected back in the Hollywood legend. A quiet resilience, a man who knew the depths of struggle. Clint nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You've got a lot more fight in you than you think, he said. But then he added something that made Marcus's heart stop. I've been where you are, Clint said, his voice softer now, laced with a vulnerability Marcus hadn't expected. When I was starting out, I lived in a tiny, run-down apartment. There were nights I didn't know where my next meal was coming from. People told me I'd never make it, said I didn't have what it took. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. But I didn't quit, and neither should you. Marcus stared at him, the weight of Clint's words sinking in. This wasn't just a casual encounter. This wasn't about charity. Clint was giving him something far more valuable than money, a mirror to his own resilience, proof that even the greats had struggled but had found a way to rise. And then Clint said something that would change everything. If you're serious about getting back on your feet, he said, pulling out a card from his jacket pocket, I know someone who can help. They run a shelter that offers work programs. They won't just give you a meal, they'll give you a way out. Marcus took the card with trembling hands, staring at the name and number printed on it. It felt like a lifeline, something real, something tangible. His chest tightened as a wave of emotions washed over him. Hope, fear, gratitude, all colliding at once. You've got one shot at this, Clint said, his voice firm but not unkind. Don't waste it. Marcus nodded, clutching the card and notebook like treasures. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. As Clint's figure disappeared into the bustling crowd, Marcus sat frozen on the bench, the weight of the notebook and card heavier than anything he'd carried in years. The city buzzed around him, indifferent as ever, but something inside Marcus had shifted. His mind replayed Clint's words on a loop. Don't waste it. He opened the notebook again, staring at the messy scrawl of his own handwriting. The words he'd written. I want to feel human again. I want a second chance at life. Felt raw, almost too honest. For so long he'd buried those feelings beneath the weight of survival, telling himself it was easier not to dream. But now, there they were, staring back at him, demanding action. The card in his hand felt like a spark, but sparks alone don't make fires. His chest tightened as doubt began creeping in. What if he called, and they turned him away? What if this was just another cruel reminder that hope was a dangerous thing for someone like him? But then he thought of Clint. He thought of the steady conviction in the man's voice, the way he had looked at Marcus, not with pity, but with belief. That look had been more powerful than any handout. It had lit something in Marcus that he hadn't felt in years, the faintest glimmer of self-worth. The next morning, Marcus stood outside the shelter's brick building, his heart pounding like a drum. He clutched the card in his pocket, his fingers tracing over the name as if it would give him courage. The building loomed in front of him, clean and inviting, but to Marcus, it felt like the tallest mountain he'd ever faced. He hesitated on the steps, his thoughts racing. What if they judge me? What if they think I'm a lost cause? But then he heard Clint's voice in his mind again. You've got one shot at this. Don't waste it. With a deep breath, Marcus pushed open the door. The warmth of the lobby hit him immediately, a stark contrast to the cold he'd grown used to. A friendly woman at the desk greeted him, her smile genuine, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he wasn't invisible. The days that followed were hard. The shelter offered him a small bed, clean clothes, and 3 meals a day, but it wasn't charity. It came with expectations. Marcus had to attend counseling, work readiness programs, and rebuild his confidence piece by piece. He struggled at first, the weight of years spent on the streets pressing against every step forward. But as days turned into weeks, something remarkable began to happen. Marcus started to see himself differently. He wasn't just a man with a cup on a sidewalk anymore. He was someone with potential, someone who could still rebuild his life. One night, as he sat on the edge of his cot, Marcus pulled out the notebook Clint had given him. Flipping to the page where he'd first written his dreams, he added new words beneath them. I'm ready to try. The next morning, he got up earlier than usual, eager to attend his first job interview set up through the program. As he straightened the tie someone had donated to him, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. For the first time in years, the man staring back at him didn't look like a shadow of who he used to be. He looked like someone who had been given a second chance. Someone determined not to waste it. Weeks later, Marcus walked down the same city streets where he once begged for spare change. But this time, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't hunched over, avoiding eye contact or carrying the weight of hopelessness. He stood taller now, dressed in a crisp button-up shirt and slacks, a uniform from his new job at a small diner where he worked as a cook. The clinking sound of coins rattling in a cup no longer haunted his steps. Instead, the rhythmic tapping of his shoes on the pavement spoke of progress, one step at a time. He had a routine now: wake up early, show up on time, work hard, and attend his counseling sessions in the evenings. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and for Marcus, it was everything. He was earning his way, finding purpose in the small victories. A paycheck at the end of the week, a warm meal he made with his own hands, and the quiet pride that came with knowing he was rebuilding his life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, Marcus found himself back at the park bench where it had all started. He sat down, pulling out the notebook Clint had given him. The edges were worn now, the pages filled with notes, dreams, and reminders of how far he had come. He flipped to the first page where he had scrawled his deepest desires on that fateful day. I want to feel human again. I want a second chance at life. Reading those words now, he couldn't help but smile. They weren't just wishes anymore. They were his reality. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes as a breeze rustled through the trees. He thought about Clint Eastwood, the man who had stopped for a stranger when no one else had. He had given Marcus more than a $100 bill. He had given him hope, a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness could spark a transformation. Opening his eyes, Marcus stared at the bustling streets in front of him, filled with people who were too busy to notice the man sitting on the bench. He smiled to himself, knowing he wasn't the same man they used to ignore. Before leaving, Marcus wrote one final note in the back of the notebook. You're never as lost as you think you are. The climb is hard, but it's worth it. It wasn't just a message for himself. It was a promise to anyone who might one day read it. As Marcus walked away from the bench, the sound of his footsteps blended with the hum of the city. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He had taken his shot, and for the first time in a long time, he felt alive. Marcus's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes all it takes is a single moment of kindness to change someone's life. It's not always about grand gestures. It's about seeing people for who they are, not where they are. Clint Eastwood's unexpected response gave Marcus more than money. It gave him belief in himself and a second chance to rewrite his story. What would you do if you had the power to inspire someone in their darkest moment? Could a small act of kindness make a difference in someone's life today? If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Let's spark conversations about hope, resilience, and the impact of believing in one another. Drop a comment below and tell us your thoughts. What stood out to you most in Marcus's journey? And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. Together, we can remind the world that no one is truly invisible.